Welcome to Krautrock Warehaus, and tonight I want to welcome Dave Lubin to the show. Tonight we are looking at our favorite albums from the year 1977. So we want to hear from you in the chat. What are your favorite albums from 1977? Let's get started. Let's do it.
Grant is changing the world one track at a time on Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Welcome to Krautrock Warehaus, and tonight I want to welcome Dave Lubin back to the show. Hey, this is yet another episode in our series where we look at our top 10 favorite albums from a certain year. We're kind of going backwards. Tonight, we are doing 1977. So get ready. We want to hear from you in the chat. What are your favorite records from 1977? We'll see. We might have some overlap here tonight. We might not. But we do want to hear from you in the chat. So please let us know down below what your albums or your favorites from this year. Anyway, Dave, how are you? Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Grant. Thanks for having me back tonight.
Excellent. Yeah, it's nice to be. Well, we had a little bit of a break, but we're back. It's been like, what, a couple months, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, it's good to continue this series. And the 70s, interesting time for music, because you had that kind of, the rock was still popular, right. But, 1977, that's when disco was really kind of reaching its peak. So it was almost like a battle between disco and rock, and wasn't it?
I mean, I almost picked something from disco, but then I thought, well...
I caved. I have one.
Okay, that's fine. In the warehouse, we're an equal opportunity employer, so hey, any type of music floats, so it's all good. So anyway, we're going to go 3, 3, 3, and 1. How's that?
All right, let's go for it.
Let's do it. You can start us out. What's your first 3 picks?
All right, so my number 10. So this album had a very interesting arc. Cheap Trick in color.
Damn it, we already overlapped.
Yeah, well, this album has a very interesting arc. It gets released in the States and makes a tiny bit of noise. It hits number 73 on Billboard. But in Japan, it becomes something of a hit. So what's kind of cool about this album is, quite honestly, in 77, I had some familiarity with this group, because I remember in 1977, I was in summer camp, and KISS was coming to the Montreal Forum, and I couldn't go because I was in summer camp, and I was so jealous that people went. And I remember going back, and the people who went said, yeah, KISS was fantastic. There was some group named Cheap Trick that opened, and I don't know, for some reason, the name stuck with me. Then a couple of years later, Cheap Trick comes out with the Budokan album. Well, what is the Budokan album? It's about half the songs on this album. Well, me liking the Budokan album so much, I went out and bought this because I wanted to hear the non-live versions. And I mean, it's just filled with the Budokan songs, but the Budokan songs all sound, that's the magic of Cheap Trick is how well their songs do sound live.
Correct.
I've seen them live about 3 times, I think. And whether it's an album or live, they can just hit the notes perfectly. So this song is filled with the Budokan songs. Hello There, Big Eyes, Clock Strikes 10, Come On, Come On. And of course, I Want You to Want Me, which became their first big hit, but not from this album, from the Budokan album. But there's a lot of other good albums on this one too. You got Southern Girls, Down, So Good to See You. So it did become a hit album, or eventually sold, but not in the conventional way. So anyway, it is a really good album. And what can I say? Japan, they picked up on it first, so good for them. So that's my number.
Okay. Heck, you know what? We might just go back and forth. Screw that whole 3, 3, and 1. Let me just go back and forth because you started it. That's also my pick. So it came out September 1st of 77. And like you mentioned, the lead single was I Want You to Want Me. Of course, this is a Cheap Trick's signature song that on Budokan really made it because they kind of revamped it, updated it, So, yes. But the Budokan really put them on the map. This album, the debut, this record, Heaven Tonight, those records didn't sell. It wasn't until Budokan they took off, and then the other records started to sell. This record only got up to 73 on the Billboard 200. And it, like you said, much more successful in Japan. But I think as a record goes, it's one of my all-time favorites. Everybody watches this channel knows I love Cheap Trick. And I love what Tom Werman did. Some people bitch about the productions. You've heard that Cheap Trick re-recorded it with Steve Albini. It's fine, but I think this record's perfect. I have no issues with it. All the songs are great. Phenomenal. Anyway, yes, I that wasn't my number. I didn't really number mine. Are yours like in preference, or are you just listing them?
I did a preference. I mean,
Okay.
there does come a point with these albums where it's really, what do I feel like listening to on what day? But
Hmm.
I kind of did a preference, so I do. I'm going in order here, 10, 9, 8, whatever. But
Yeah, like my choices, I just want to say it. These are pretty much, I don't think they're really going to alternate. Um, I don't know. These are pretty much set in stone. Some people, your ranking may change. I didn't do mine as a ranking, but Cheap Trick and Color, I would have to say, is pretty far up there on my list. All right. Perfect. Excellent. So far, Dave, we are lining up. What's your next pick?
we won't line up on this one. Not that I think you
Yeah.
think it's
Hey,
bad.
you never know.
Well, I went with a soundtrack because
No,
I've got
no, I won't. No.
my sound my sound of soundtracks is on hiatus right now. I'll tell you people why at the end, and we will bring that back. However, in 1977, there was a movie starring Robbie Benson, which he co-wrote, called One on One.
Yeah.
Now, the most of these songs are actually by Seals and Crofts. The movie is a pretty good movie, but I've always really liked this soundtrack. And the songs were co-written. Actually, the songs were written by Paul Williams, and actually Charles Fox wrote the music. And actually, if you look, Paul, there you see Seals and Crofts, Robbie Benson, and
They're
Paul
all in
Williams.
jerseys. I love it.
Paul Williams, of course, is a lot shorter because he's a short guy, but that's what he would make fun of himself on Johnny Carson and all that. Anyway, this is a really good album. It didn't really do much. The Love Thing, My Fair Share was a top 40 hit, but it's just filled with really good renditions of Paul Williams' song by Seals and Crofts. I'm surprised they didn't collaborate a little more because Paul Williams wrote a lot, collaborate a lot with Three Dog Night and Helen Reddy, and it's just filled with good stuff. This Day Belongs to Me. At some point I will talk about this the sound of soundtracks and where all these different songs fit in the movie. This is a really good example of where the soundtrack really helps the movie a lot. It's a pretty good movie, and I think it's helped by that. There's as I said, the My Fair Share is the most famous song on it, but then the second one, This Day Belongs to Me, that was the intro song. There's a great song on it called John Wayne, and there's another one called Love Conquers All. That was the final one, and then like any soundtrack, it's got a lot of music only type things, but it's a really good soundtrack. I think it's underrated. Didn't get any love at all from Oscars, as we'll talk about later. The Oscars don't always know what they're talking about, but it's a really good album. And if you like Seals and Crofts, they do a great job with these Paul Williams songs.
So what's that? Hold that record up. Is that a cutout in that record? Is it a cutout?
No, it's you see, it's just this, and this would be an original copy. It's Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's cut because it's an old album, but
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, I remember that movie, but man, I don't think I've ever seen that soundtrack.
yeah, it's a pretty good soundtrack. I think it is available on Apple Music because I remember when I was starting to buy songs on Apple Music, I went and bought a bunch from there.
Yeah, cool, awesome.
Yeah.
All right, my next pick. See, we've already splintered. I'm going to go with a record that came out March 8th of 1977. This is one of those albums, or you might say this track, which was one of the singles from the record, I had heard like on American Top 40. When I was a kid, I'd set up a tape player and, the American Top 40 would play and I would try to tape songs off of it. One of those songs I kept taping was Feels Like the First Time. So this was my first gateway entry to the band Foreigner. So I'm going to go with the debut album. Like I said, came out March 8th, 1977. Reached number 4 on the Billboard chart. Also made the top 10 in Canada. So you should, you totally know that record, Dave. So the singles, Feels Like the First Time, Cold as Ice, Long, Long Way from Home were all singles. I think you might call this arena rock. It wasn't much arena rock before this, but great, great record. Of course, you've got Mick Jones, who started the band, who was in Spooky Tooth, Ian McDonald, who was in King Crimson, and then Lou Gramm came from the band Black Sheep, but Al Greenwood keyboards, Dennis Elliott drums, great band. Saw them on the Double Vision tour when I was a kid. Always made a big impression, but I could not list this discussion without the Foreigner debut album. So that's my number.
Well, I
two.
ordered mine, and actually, you kind of stole my thunder because it's my number one of 1970.
There you go. Well, we're already okay. That's
Yeah,
fine.
we're 2 out of 10. But it's great. I mean, you've got some deep tracks on here. Head Knocker, Fool for You Anyway, with two great songs. And then Star Rider is the only song that Mick Jones actually is the lead vocal on. So, and I think Star Rider is actually my favorite song on the album, in fact.
Yeah, it's great because I think all the Mick Jones tracks when he takes vocals are great. He takes vocals on Double Vision. He takes vocals on Head Games. But then after that, when they trimmed down to a 4-member band, they just he didn't sing anymore. I don't know. I liked it. I liked it when Mick Jones would sing. It's just weird. But the first 3 Foreigner albums, I really love. So it is what it is.
I like the first 4, and then they did come up with some later stuff. Actually, I think my favorite song is from them. Oh God, I'm having to pull it, but. Anyway, I did like some of their mid-'80s songs as well. So.
Oh, yeah. They had a lot of great singles, yeah.
Oh, that was Yesterday is actually my favorite Foreigner song, and that was a later one. So
yeah, that's like 87.
Yeah.
I think 86, I think it's 87. All right. Great song. I like it. All right, cool. Well, we're kind of synced up. My next pick, I'm going to go with a band that released this record 7/7 of 77. Now, if you know what that date is, you probably know what record this is. But it had 2 major hit singles, Come Sail Away, very iconic, reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100, and Fooling Yourself, which is a Tommy Shaw song. It peaked at number 29, but this is often considered their best record. This is a big seller, hit number 6. The album hit number 6 on the Billboard chart. Certified triple platinum here in the United States. I'm going to go with Styx, Grand Illusion. So this record's kind of a mix of rock, prog, and you might as well throw in pop. Great complex arrangements, theatrical, a lot of ranges and styles. When Tommy Shaw joined the band in 1975, that just opened up Styx to a whole new world because Tommy could play anything. His vocals are brilliant. Songwriting chops are there. Styx really arrived when Tommy Shaw came on the scene. So first album was Crystal Ball. And then they did Grand Illusion with Tommy, and then everything was just wonderful. So anyway, this is yet another record that I got turned on to when I was a kid, and I've loved it ever since. It's just like Cheap Trick in Color and the first Foreigner album. So there's a common theme here, Dave. Common theme.
Well, Grant, that's my number 2.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
So you've already named my number 1 and my number 2, but yeah, it's I had like a little bit of, I was kind of going back and forth between this one and the Foreigner debut. But yeah, they still play. The first time I saw Styx, it was actually the Cornerstone tour, but they still played a whole bunch of songs in that album, and it's just filled with great stuff. I remember they played Miss America as the encore. That's a fantastic song. Not necessarily the biggest hit song. Superstars. That's another one that's kind of like that. Kind of a deep track, and then my favorite is a real deep track, Castle Walls. I always really like that.
But I like the whole. When I listen to this record, Dave, there's nothing weak on it.
Yeah, no, there's not a bad song.
There's nothing you want to skip over.
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely
I totally
not.
agree. No, it's a great album. And you're talking about in Canada. So Styx actually had Styx was we did a show on Supertramp, and I was talking about how Supertramp became a super group in Canada before the United States, and that kind of happened with Styx too. They kind of hit their superstardom with Equinox in Canada, where it was this album that sent them to sort of that superstardom in the United States. So
right.
Equinox was 2 albums before this one, or was it 3?
Yeah. Yeah, when they got signed to A&M, things started to change. Well, I think probably A&M pumped a little bit more money, gave them a little bit more of a budget than they probably had when they were with Wood and Nickel. Though I do like some of that Wood and Nickel period, don't get me wrong, but something seemed to, once they got on A&M, a little bit more money, I think that probably helped them out some.
Well, that Equinox album was just played like a ton in Montreal back in the day, and it was like a big thing when they came to the Forum. And as I said, this I mean, they were doing okay. They had a top 10 hit before this. Lady actually had hit the top 10, although Lady had sort of a kind of it didn't become a hit right out of the gate. It had kind of an interesting arc to it. But anyway, yeah, this album, like you said, it's a great album. So we're 3 for so far. We're in agreement on 3. So
all right. Well, all right. I'll keep going. My next one, I'm going to go with the record that I would not have picked originally. Now, in 2018, somewhere 2019, I believe there was a remix. James Guthrie remixed this record, and now it's like one of my favorite records from this band. Now, the original mix of this record, I think, was a muddy mess. There was really everything just kind of laid there. Now, normally I'm not a fan of remixes, but this record always needed it. And once they remixed it, it brought life to the record. Now, some people like this record. Some people, it's okay. Don't think it's one of their best ones. Either you love it or you hate it. I'm going to go with Pink Floyd Animals, released January 23rd of 1977. It's a loose concept album based on George Orwell's Animal Farm. Everybody should know this record. If you're a Pink Floyd fan, you know this record in and out. But it's very kind of a dark sounding record. And it was much darker before the remix. But man, if anybody's out there and you have not heard the remix of Pink Floyd Animals, please do yourself a favor. Go out and find it. It just breathes life to the record. So I'm going to list that. Normally I would not have, because I wasn't a real big fan of this record until this remix, and now I just can't get enough of it. So I'm going to go with Pink Floyd Animals. Now, I'm not sure where it ranked on the charts, how big of a seller this was, but yeah, that's my next pick.
It was post Dark Side of the Moon. I know that.
Yeah, it was Dark Side, and then Wish You Were Here, and then Animals.
I mean, Dark Side of the Moon, is it still on the chart, the Billboard Top 200? I mean, and it went on the Top 200 and never got off, it seems. So.
Yeah, I think it did drop off, but I don't know. But anyway, Pink Floyd Animals.
All right, my turn.
Yep.
All right, so I think here I've got something a little different for you. I don't know if you've ever talked about this band at all on the Warehaus. 10cc. Okay. So 10cc, they're best known for basically 2 songs that are still played a ton all over classic rock radio. I'm Not in Love. But then on this one, Deceptive Bends, we've got The Things We Do for Love, which I think is a really good little pop song. But I think 10cc is one of those bands that people don't realize they have a lot of good music. And this I think is their best one. And it's just filled with like kind of fun pop rock, goofy, fun lyrics. And my favorite song is the first one on side 2. It's called Honeymoon with B Troop. And that's just a fun little kind of fast-paced little song, and the lyrics change a lot. The music pace changes all the time. It's actually a real interesting song. If you've never heard it, you take a listen to it. It is my favorite song they ever did. But these guys do what they do. They like to come up with like sort of like they have fun with their music. So their very first song is a song called Good Morning Judge, which has kind of which was I think it was a little bit of a hit in Great Britain, not so much here. Got a little play. They've got another song on here called You've Got a Cold. Again, it's just silly lyrics, but these guys are having a lot of fun. I think this did better apparently in Canada than it did in the United States. It did hit number 31, but it got no designation at all, whereas in Canada it was declared gold, and it went gold in the UK and Australia. the biggest thing they had out of this album was a gold single, "The Things We Do for Love," sold 1 million copies. So
Very Beatlesque. I love that song.
so good album, both. That's it.
Yeah,
And, and what I would say is if you want to kind of like look up one song from that album, look up that "Honeymoon with Beach Troop" song.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Great stuff. Great pick. I did not pick that. But this one could be on your list. I don't know. This record came out October 28th of 77, 2-record set, which was a bold move. Some people think that this could possibly be their peak. I think that the record before this was probably their peak. And, like, let's say The Cure, Disintegration. I think that was the peak of The Cure. And then Wish, which is also damn near as good, but a slight decline. I kind of look at this band and the band ELO kind of in the same breath. So the album we're looking at is ELO Out of the Blue. The record before, I think, was just a little bit better. A 2-record set's pretty ambitious, 1977. But each side of the record, which was kind of cool, was named after a season of the year. So you had autumn, winter, spring, and summer, which is kind of cool. Seems like something the Beatles would do. But yeah, Turn to Stone, It's Over, Sweet Talking Woman. I mean, it was really packed up front. Night in the City, Starlight, Jungle, a lot of great songs on here. Mr. Blue Sky. Well, think about this. Here's the singles that were on this record. This just goes to show you how strong it was. All these were hit singles. Turn to Stone, Sweet Talking Woman, Mr. Blue Sky, and Wild West Hero. This got up to number 4 on the Billboard Chart 200. Multi-platinum in the USA. In the UK, it has exceeded sales in 10 million copies. This, no doubt, was the biggest seller the ELO ever had. Now, some people think this is their peak. Some people don't. I think it's if this isn't their peak, the album before was. But this is almost as good as that. And the other thing is, if you remember, back in the day when this came out, remember you would open up the vinyl, open it up, and it'd have that big spaceship. A lot of the original pressings had a mobile that you could get that you could set up. You'd have to put it together. It had a insert to buy merchandise, much like a Kiss album. I mean, they pumped a lot of money into this record. So the record company was really behind them. I think it's a great record for 1977. I don't have any issues with it. It's ambitious. It sounds great. I think Jeff Lynne was really probably at his peak as a songwriter right here. Everybody knows this record. How could you not list 1977 without it? So that's my next pick.
So I think I'm a pretty darn big ELO fan.
Yeah.
I'm going to surprise you. This album is not on my list. And it's not an oversight. It just, I can't explain it to you. This album just did not do it for me the way, and when we talk about 1976, I promise you, we'll talk about a New World Record.
Right.
And then
that's the record. That's the best record.
And then I like Discovery after that. This one, it's not that I think it's bad. It's like, I just sort of felt like, I just sort of felt it was too formula. There was nothing about it. The one song I really like on it is the one that he actually opened up, that he opens up the tour with when in his current version, and that's "Standing in the Rain." And I think that's a pretty cool song. I mean, I like all those songs that you mentioned, "Turn to Stone," "Sweet Talking Woman," all those, "Mr. Blue Sky," but they just never resonated with me the way
that's good. That's fine.
The albums before and the albums after did. So it didn't make the cut with me. It just didn't.
It's all right. We're mentioning it today, though. Hey, we're here talking music. We all hear things differently, but I can see what you're saying when you think it's a little bit, it's just following a formula. It's just kind of more of the same. Nothing. There's no real branching out. Like, well, Discover, you would say that, Jeff Lynne's branching out more. It's a little bit different record, more of disco element on that record than this.
Yeah, he went like kind of disco pop, and I actually I really liked it. I mean, I remember when we talked about, what was that, 79? It was either I think it might have been my second, or I think it was my second favorite album. I think I said Panorama was my favorite album that year. I don't remember, but anyway.
Yeah, I totally get it.
I can't wait to do 76. Let's put it that way.
We're getting there.
Okay.
All right, Dave. What's next? What do you got next?
I got it's with sweet sorrow we bring up this album because it was a superb, fantastic album, and unfortunately we never got to hear anything from this band again in the way that this band was meant to be heard, and that would be Street Survivors by Lynyrd Skynyrd, essentially their final album. Mm-hmm. So they have kind of an interesting arc. I talk about like where the band went. They absolutely crushed their debut. You put Freebird on your first album, and then you add a whole bunch of other songs that are still played like a ton today for good reason, like Simple Man. As a matter of fact, I think their debut is still their best album. But then they came up with Second Helping, a whole bunch of other good songs. And then if you watch a documentary on them, I always thought they kind of fell off a little bit when they had Nothing Fancy and Give Me Back My Bullets. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of like, there's good stuff on them. They're such great musicians. They're not going to come up with bad music. But it's like they weren't really going anywhere. And then Ronnie Van Zant, he says in that documentary, okay, we've just added Stevie Gaines, and we've put out some of the best stuff Skynyrd ever did. And it's a fan. First of all, there's 3 classic rock staples that, especially in the South, these songs are so darn good. They're so darn radio friendly, and yet they're everything that Lynyrd Skynyrd is. The fantastic guitars, the strong vocals. Now I'm talking about What's Your Name, You Got That Right, and That Smell. So those are the ones that are like the people know. This whole album is fantastic. It's got some other notable songs like I Know a Little. Ain't No Good Life is another great song. It's a double platinum album. It peaked at number 13, so a Southern rock album peaked at number 13 and right in the heart of disco era. So that says a lot. And What's Your Name actually peaked at number 13. But anytime I'm driving in the car and I hear What's Your Name or You Got That Right, that's a crank up type song. Those songs, they're so darn catchy, and I never get sick of them. It's kind of funny. If there's one song by them that's played all the time that, yes, it's a great song, but I can't listen to it anymore for whatever reason. I can't listen to Sweet Home Alabama anymore. But those songs I can't get enough of. So Street Survivors was my number 7 pick. We're kind of going all over the place here, but I think that's a fantastic album.
It's all good. It's all good, David. All right. My next pick, I'm going to go with a band that, a lot of the time I was spending in my youth, I would record records. I had a little Sanyo boombox. I would make tapes. This is one of those records I recorded a lot, and I would play it walking around the neighborhood with my friends. And it's just one of those albums that's just ingrained in my soul. I'm going to go with an album that came out September 1st, 1977. Had 2 singles released of it. One track you probably don't want to hear again because they played it to death. Closer to the Heart became Rush's one of their most well-known songs, obviously. And Cinderella Man was also a single, did not chart, didn't have anywhere near the same success that Closer to the Heart did. But this record got up in the U.S., it got up to like number 33 on the Billboard 200. And we're talking Rush, A Farewell to Kings. If you were around a couple years ago and you were able to see Primus tour this record, they were out. They played various venues. This is around, I think, the end of COVID, but they played the whole album. And if anybody could play this album, Primus could do it. Absolutely wonderful. Xanadu, great song. Farewell to Kings leads it off. It's a prog epic. It just seems like this is like one of those records. This came after 2112. This just even the blending, he had 2112. This just seemed to make a more perfect blend to me between the prog and the hard rock elements and the songwriting. With each album, they improved in songwriting, I think. So, great record. It's ingrained in my DNA. So, Rush, A Farewell to Kings is my next pick.
Yeah, I really like that album too. Xanadu would be my favorite song on that one.
It's
I still very much enjoy hearing Closer to the Heart, by the way.
Oh, God, yes.
I think it's a really good album. It was that would be an honorable mention for me for this year, but as a matter of fact, that one, it was that was one of them that I said, no, it doesn't quite make the cut, but it was close.
It's all good. All right, what's your next pick?
All right, so we talked about this band on one of your shows, Supertramp. Even in the quietest moments, it was sort of their build-up in the United States to their big hit "Breakfast in America," but it did pretty well on its own. What happened with them, as we talked about on that show, is that they made some noise with "Crime of the Century," which was a humongous hit in Canada. It was a moderate hit here. Gold album, had a top 40 hit. Then, for whatever reason, and I don't agree, people didn't like "Crisis What Crisis" much, even though I really loved that album. And then they came out with this. They had a hit song with "Give a Little Bit." In fact, it hit number 15 on the Billboard chart. Still played a lot today. It's filled with great songs. I mean, Even in the Quietest Moments, that's probably my favorite track on the album. But Loverboy is a real good one. And then, they have that kind of signature, song that just shows all their musicianship. And that would be the Fool's Overture. Parts of that were heard in the wide world of sports in the day. There's a world critics list that have this on the top 200 albums of all time. It's in that foursome. So we, going back to that Supertramp show, as I said, it was my least favorite of the four. However, every single one of these albums is excellent. So it's kind of a tomato thing. I still think it's a great album. It's just that if you're going to force me to say what's my favorite, I mean, it's tough for me. But this one would be the fourth, but it's still fantastic. So no complaints about it. It's just don't like it quite as much as Breakfast in America or Crisis with Crisis or Crime of the Century, but great album.
All right.
Absolutely great album.
Excellent. All right. My next pick, I'm going with the record, came out October 28th, 1977. This kind of really had two big hits. Now, this is really a double A side. Side one, singles. We Are the Champions. Side two, We Will Rock You. If anybody's followed AM FM rock radio, you always know they always play We Are the Champions, followed by We Will Rock You, segued together. They played it like that for years. They go hand in hand. But some markets, they released the song Spread Your Wings, also a great song. But anyway, We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions, Sheer Heart Attack. I mean, I don't think Queen rocked any harder than they did on the track Sheer Heart Attack. Another great song, All Dead, Spread Your Wings, Fight from the Inside, Get Down, Make Love, Sleeping on the Sidewalk. A lot of variety on this record. This is like one of the first Queen albums that I ever got into, and it's probably my favorite one. It's very diverse. Is it as good as A Night at the Opera? Yeah, well,
that's hard to do. That was such an amazing album.
Probably not, but this is still my favorite because it's just where a lot of this stuff. It's where you come in, and this is where I came into the band. So anyway, this is my favorite record. Queen would be on my list. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no cracks on this record. I will say that. But guitars sound great. Queen self-produced this. Mike Stone was the engineer. I have no complaints. We didn't even miss Roy Thomas Baker on here. Queen had it down. And well, Mike Stone, let's be honest, was doing a lot of engineering on the Roy Thomas Baker stuff. So Mike already had it down. I think it's still great. This is my favorite Queen album. I had to list it. So that's my next pick.
All right. Well, I'm up.
You're up.
All right. Well, this is the last time you're going to hear from this band from me, but I keep bringing them up. And here we go again. Prism.
Oh, Prism, yeah.
Okay, so Prism, this was their debut album, and I think it was a darn fine debut album. It was produced by Bruce Fairbairn. It had 3 tracks written by Jim Vallance, who's very much responsible for bringing Bryan Adams to the fold. In fact, I've brought this up a few times in the show. Bryan Adams really began his career by writing songs for these guys. Wrote a number of really good songs for them. This album did pretty well in Canada, sold 100,000 copies. They were one of those bands that were making little small dents in the United States, but never really quite made it. This album did get to 137 on Billboard and actually had 2 songs that got made the top 100. Spaceship Superstar got to number 82, and Take Me to the Captain made to number 59. So I don't know. I know that there is online a concert they did in Royal Oak, Michigan. So they must have gotten some play somewhere. I'm also guessing because they're Vancouver, maybe they got a little bit of play on the West Coast, Seattle, maybe Portland. I don't know. But if I was to pick my 10 favorite songs by Canadian band, their very first song on their very first album, Spaceship Superstar, might be it. I mean, if you're going to force me to say, what's your favorite song by Canadian band? I think that might be it. There's something about that song. It's absolutely infectious. It's got fantastic synthesizer, Ron Tabak's great vocals. Love that song. And then my second favorite song on this album was the very last song. It's a song called I Ain't Looking Anymore. Another kind of fast-paced rock song. And then there's a song in here called Vladivostok, which is also kind of a good song. A lot of good songs on this. There's some nice ballads on here. Julie, that's really good. It's Over. And I know you're an April Wine fan.
I am.
The second song on the album was actually recorded by April Wine on the Walking Through Fire album called Open Soul Surgery. It's actually a Prism song. Ironically, it's one of my least favorite Prism songs, and I don't like the April Wine version either. As a matter of fact, I'd say and I don't know why of all songs, that's the one that Miles chose to record, but that's what he did. But nevertheless, I really quite like this song and this album. And your listeners, if you've never heard Spaceship Superstar, got to hear it.
Yeah, Walking Through Fire was a bit of a disappointment. Let's say that. Well, it was a contractual album, you know.
Oh yeah, no, you have to come up with one more album, and you can only get Brian Greenway to come back for that album. The rest of the band wouldn't do it with him.
They were done. Yeah. So is it an April Wine album?
Well, the thing about having April Wine, there were so many different renditions of that band anyway.
Yeah.
It's the first April Wine, an April Wine album. So there you go.
Yeah, but everybody always looks at them as the classic lineup. We're talking Nature the Beast, Harder, Faster. You know, that lineup is that's what I look as the definite version of April Wine. But we all look at it differently. We did a whole April Wine show series that went for a year. Go back and check that out down below. So we all had different opinions, so it's all good. My next pick, I'm going to go with a record that's probably considered the definite punk rock record, probably this along with the first Ramones album. I think both of those records are iconic and changed a lot of things. I'm going to go with the Sex Pistols, Never Mind the Bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols. Had a couple of hits. I don't really know what the chart success was here in the States. I know it sold like 300,000 copies in the UK, so it did real well. It probably hit platinum over there. But you had several singles. You had Anarchy in the UK that came out in 1976, God Save the Queen, and Pretty Vacant. All were successful. Holidays in the Sun. That was also single. Very successful. Not so much here, but in the UK and in Europe, this was a big deal. So if you know anything about it, it's very raw energy, but it's a very good recording by Bill Price and produced by Chris Thomas. In fact, that same duo also did the first Pretenders album. Chris Thomas, Bill Price worked on a lot of projects, but the production here is real tight. The guitars sound very aggressive, very raw. Of course, you've got Johnny Rotten's confrontational lyrics, but it's very simple, short songs, and it's just about rhythm. It's just about the songs, and none of these guys are, virtuosos. They're just very competent. They can do what they need to do. But really, for a band that you kind of look at them, well, didn't Malcolm McLaren pretty much put them together? Yeah, but for something that was, developed kind of like out of a test tube, this has been a very influential, great record. It still stands up today. What can I say? It's just considered one of the greatest. Remember the Rolling Stone top 500 albums? This was always ranked up high, Dave, like number 2, number 3. I don't know what it's ranked now. I'm sure Taylor Swift has overtaken that, but I'm just saying, At one time, this was considered one of the most important records, one of the greatest albums of all time. So, how could I not mention it? So that's yet my next pick. So there you go. Sex Pistols, Never Bind the Bollocks. Here's the Sex.
Yeah, during your build-up, I thought you were going to bring up Ramones, but you brought up Sex Pistols.
Well,
and, okay, that
I
makes
could have
sense.
brought up the Ramones. That's 76
Yeah.
next month. There you go. But anyway, there you go. Sex Pistols.
Okay, you ready for the next one? I got only two more because because we already talked about my top two, so we got my number 4 and 3.
Yep.
All right, so my number 4 is so on my Sound of Soundtrack song, you appeared with me and we did a deep dive on this one.
Oh yeah.
And we did a deep dive on Saturday Night Fever. So I said I went with one disco album. So what's kind of interesting about this is that I remember at the time I was very into rock music and I was, one of those teenagers, oh no, heck, I'm not listening to disco. But I never stopped listening to this one. I always liked this music. I always thought it was very interesting. It shows how talented the Bee Gees were because they kind of started off as a 60s British pop band and they had, quite a number of like fairly successful hits.
First
and
album.
Yeah, there you go. And, they had all those hits, they, Words and To Love Somebody, et cetera, so all throughout the 60s. And then they completely changed their sound and they reached this whole other level of success that, beyond like, and hey, for those who don't know, the Bee Gees, when the 60s version was a darn popular band. But then they brought it to this whole other level with their whole disco sound. They started the disco sound before this because they had hits like Jive Talkin', which is on this album, and You Should Be Dancing is on this album. But it's the original songs that they just did, off the charts. So they themselves, Bee Gees, had 3 #1 hits on this album. Staying Alive, Night Fever, How Deep Is Your Love. They wrote If I Can't Have You by Yvonne Elliman. That was a #1 hit. And then the album also features a bunch of other, disco stars of the day. So it has Kool and the Gang and Casey and the Sunshine Band. Tavares does More Than a Woman, as do the Bee Gees. And then, of course, of the non-Bee Gees songs, other than Yvonne Elliman, the other really huge song on the album, memorable one, was Disco Inferno by the Tramps. So, we talked about this. This album won 5 Grammy Awards, and yet somehow I talked earlier about how the One-on-One album was completely ignored by the Oscars. Well, despite the fact that this thing sold 40 million copies and won 5 Grammys, it did not get one Oscar nomination. So always one of the weirdest things, and I don't know what that says about who was nominating the songs for Oscar. I don't know how you can overlook that. There had to be one of those songs, How Deep Is Your Love, Staying Alive, that should have been nominated for Best Song, but at the very least, you would think the soundtrack would have been like, I know you and I talked about what album won Best Soundtrack that year. I can't even remember, but it was like, what the heck was that? So anyway, for if anybody wants to go back and look at my Sound of Soundtracks show, Grant and I did a deep dive on that album. Yep. If anybody likes that album,
there you go. I almost picked it because I love that record. I didn't like it when I was a kid, but I do like it now. All right, my next pick. We're going to go with a record that you could consider a concept album. Probably most people don't consider it that. It's a very influential record now. Now, when it came out, it didn't really sell very much. But the concept revolves around a metaphorical journey of basically a train ride through Europe. So think about that. Yeah, I mean, the train serves both the literal and symbolic meanings of things. We're just traveling through time and culture, so to speak. So that's really the concept of it. But this record had a lot of influence on electronic music, hip hop, techno, anything like that. This would probably be the birth. In fact, you might say, Dave, this probably had some influence on Saturday Night Fever. Maybe. I don't know. Critically acclaimed, like I said, it didn't sell a whole lot, but this band, I actually saw them less than a year ago. They played Columbus, and it was phenomenal. They didn't move a whole lot, and, they were all playing keyboards, but still, this record, is influenced, or not this record, but this band. All their albums are good. But a lot of the new wave artists, think of the Human League. Without Kraftwerk, you wouldn't have the Human League. So I'm going to go with Kraftwerk's Trans Europe Express. A great record. Like I said, very highly influential. A lot of people note this when they're, like the techno bands and all stuff. You probably wouldn't know any tracks if I had mentioned them. Europe Endless, people will go, what track's that? But you cannot deny that Kraftwerk were very much one of the great innovators of the early 70s. And we owe a lot to their sound and way music changed, I think, to some degree. So, yeah, Kraftwerk. Have to mention Kraftwerk, for God's sakes, Dave.
Yeah, and I think we talked about Kraftwerk on other shows we've done with this.
Probably. We might have. I don't remember. But if you listen to some of the disco stuff, you kind of, if you squint, you could go, well. But during that time period when Kraftwerk were in the 1977, who was sounded anything like this? Nobody. I mean, would it sell? Well, probably not. But just the influence. I just had to mention it, very influential. So Kraftwerk. All right. What's your next one?
The next one is my last one. So it's not my number one, but it's going to be about, because we talked about my number one being Foreigner, my number two being Styx the Grand Illusion.
Yep.
It's an album I know when we ever talk about the April Wine Show, you're always kind of surprised how much I like this album. But I really do like this album. I've always really liked this album. It would be, and I think when we ranked it,
yeah.
I think I gave it number 2 or 3 that day. I can't remember. Probably third.
It was high on your list.
It was high. I remember that, and I remember the rest of the gang was like, "Really?" Well, what I always liked about this was it really kind of showed Miles Goodwin's versatility. So it was supposed to be a Miles Goodwin solo project, and the producers said, "No, April Wine needs to come up with an album to keep the momentum going and all that kind of good stuff." And what ended up happening was they ended up having their only Canadian gold single, "You Won't Dance With Me," which I don't think is one of the stronger songs in the album, and I don't think it's one of their stronger ballads. It's it's a cute little song, but it's the rest of this album that I really, really enjoy. So starting with the title track, which is the first song of the album, "Forever For Now," it kind of comes out with an April Wine kind of fast rocker with the guitar and all that, and then it just gets into all these different things. So you've got the ballads, "Child's Garden," "Loving You." So, I mean, he does a great job with ballads. Then he has like this fun song that's always been my favorite April Wine deep track called "Hollywood."
Yeah.
"Come Away" is another ballad. Then he starts, trying some different things. He tries some calypso with Mummalay, and he tries some Western with "Hard Times," and then he ends with a ballad, "Marjorie." But again, shows his versatility. He himself loves writing like blues, and in his final years, he came up with a few blues albums that
I like those records. Yeah.
So anyway, that's that would be my number 3 for that year. Right. And as I said, it's probably about, I can't remember. It's like my 3rd or 4th favorite April Wine album.
Excellent. All right, my final one I'm going to go with. Wow, this probably should be low-hanging fruit, I guess. This was released February 4th, 1977. This has pop, this has rock, this has folk, it's got lush harmonies, a lot of emotional depth, a lot of emotional turmoil on this record, a lot of breakups on this record, a lot of drug use, a lot of cocaine was made on this record, but it's one of their best records. I don't think they ever put out a record as good as this. Now, this also was one of those records that when I was a kid, I heard it and I'm just going, oh my God, if I have to hear this again, I'm just going to die. But, after things move on, they don't play it as much. But yeah, they still play a lot from this record. It reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 for 31 weeks. Reaching number 1 in a lot of countries too. It's 20 times platinum. We're probably sick of this record. The whole record is great. You know where I'm going to go with this. I'm going to go with Fleetwood Mac, "Rumours." The singles on here, "Go Your Own Way," Dreams, only #1 hit in the States. Don't Stop, You Make Lovin' Fun. The whole thing. The Fleetwood Mac was just on. I don't know if it was the drugs, the turmoil, but kind of like this in the first Fleetwood Mac, not the first one, but you know what I mean. The first with this lineup with Lindsey Buckingham, Stevie Nicks. So the album that came out before this, just Fleetwood Mac, they're kind of go hand in hand. It's one of those records, kind of like the Cars and Candy-O, that I could just throw up in the air and mix them up and they would all fit together because both of them were equally as strong. I do like Tusk quite a bit, but that was a little bit more experimental, a little bit different than these records. At least, Fleetwood Mac and Rumours both really have a similar tone. There's not much more I can say about it. I had to list it just for the fact that it is one of the biggest records of all time. It still stands up. It still sounds fresh. And I do love it. I love it. I don't turn to it all the time. I'm always trying to, well, now I study for shows all the time, but I think it had to be mentioned because it is really one outstanding album from 1977. So
yeah, my favorite songs from that album, and I think it's just because they didn't get played as much, would be The Chain and Secondhand News. I mean, everything was played from this.
Everything was played,
but those ones were not played as much. So it's like, okay, like that's at least I feel like I'm listening to something a little more fresher, as it were. But those would be my two favorite songs from that particular album.
One of my favorite tracks, though, from this record that was a B-side. Now I can't remember if it was a B-side. What track? No, or Go Your Own Way. The song Silver Springs. Which was basically, well, it turned out to be a B-side, but it was recorded for this record. Phenomenal. They were just on fire. For everybody hating each other, and I guess when you're in turmoil, you can produce great artistic works. And that's what this was. So there you go.
Right.
Any honorable mentions or anything you want to bring up?
Yeah, let's talk about this one. I mean, so now we're in 1977, and it was just fun to have an original release.
Yeah.
And we had an original release that year, the Beatles live at the Hollywood Bowl. So, I mean, I like all Beatles, but I certainly like old Beatles, and this is just loaded with, older Beatles songs. You get to hear live versions of, All My Lovin', She Loves You, Ticket to Ride. And then, and then in the early days of Beatles, they would do a lot more recordings of other people's songs, like Twist and Shout and Roll Over Beethoven and, Dizzy Miss Lizzie. I mean, these were famous rock songs at the time, standards. The Beatles would record them. They would record a lot of other people's music. And then by the time they, started recording the Sgt. Pepper and the Magical Mystery Tour and these kinds of albums, I mean, at that point, it was pretty much, I think there was a point where I don't think they recorded anybody's music anymore, but they do some interesting recordings of them. But I just remember at the time I went out, I bought this album. It was a lot of fun to listen to, and it was just kind of cool to have, a Beatles album, and it sold well, hit #2, and so there was still a hunger for Beatles music, and they released these recordings that were made in August of '64 and '65. And, the public were still into the Beatles and still wanted to hear something, fresh and get the memory of something they were never going to get to hear.
Right. Well, when those came out, of course, I was a kid. I had to have them.
Yeah.
Because I was a big Beatles geek. I had to have it. So I think I got it for Christmas, maybe.
Yeah, this is an original. This is the original album.
Yeah.
Release the whole thing, got posters, pennants. And that you got the fans. So, okay, what label is this anyway?
Capitol.
Yeah, it's a Capitol, right? There you go.
I think that came out on Parlophone in the UK. I'm sure it got a release, but this was probably motivated more by Capitol Records here to get something out.
So. Good album.
There you go.
I want to hear some live Beatles.
Great record. Now, did you ever hear the reissue where Ron Howard did the movie?
Yeah, I've never actually seen the movie. I that's one of those things I'd like to see.
Now, I saw that movie in the theater, And during that theatrical release, they also had a restored version of Beatles at Shea Stadium with the audio all fixed, and the film looked absolutely beautiful. I think it was shot on 16 millimeter, but man, it was stunning.
You
All
think about
restored.
Ron? Well, I'm just thinking about Ron Howard. He'd be a good person to do that because he would have grown up in the Beatles era.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's of that age.
Right. So yeah, if you get to see it, see it. I don't think the Shea Stadium stuff ever got released though. I think that was only for the theatrical, kind of like a little bonus at the after the documentary, you know. But I don't know, well worth seeing. I'm just telling you. But yeah,
there's a good Beatles exhibit here in Cleveland at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it shows them, doing recordings of the Let It Be album, and it's kind of cool. You see them recording, and then you see Linda and Yoko in the studio talking to each other. It's actually kind of it's a fun sociological watch. Let's put it that way.
So, all right, I guess we did it. Let's wrap this one up, Dave. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Our picks from 1977. We do want to hear from you in the chat. I read everything, every comment that it comes across. I try to respond. And we do want, well, I know we both want to hear from you in the chat. What are your favorite records from 1977? What did we miss? I mean, obviously, we could have done top 20, couldn't we? We could have.
Every single one of these years, there's always
we'd be going for 2 hours. But yeah, we do want to hear from you. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And Dave, is there anything happening with you?
So we have the Sound of Soundtracks. I actually put it on hiatus. Why? Because it's been a lifelong dream of mine to see the Detroit Lions make the Super Bowl. So this year seems to be seemingly as good a chance as they're ever going to have. They're playing great. However, I sit here and I've been recording a show every single week. It's called Detroit Lions Review and Preview. That I've completely devoted my channel to it. I talk about the game that was. I talk about the game that's going to be. And I mean, if there's, I don't know how many Lions fans actually watch your show, Grant, but if you please subscribe, and we're going to see. Am I going to, be a very disappointed fan because somebody's going to have a day and just beat them in the playoffs? I don't know. It could happen. Nevertheless, we'll see.
Well, I was going to say, I'll put the link down below, but where can they find you on YouTube? If someone searches.
It's the Detroit Lions Review and Preview is my current name of my channel.
Okay.
Yeah, but I can put the link of my show.
Well, or just send it to me and I'll put it down below. So please check out Dave's channel. You never know what Dave's up to.
Well, once the season ends, we're going to go back to the Sound of Soundtracks, and then we're going to get back to that. So
okay. So anyway, check out Dave's channel. Give him some love. Give him subscribe, please. If you haven't subscribed to the Warehouse, please do that. Please leave a thumbs up. I never asked for that. Anyway, Dave and I have some more things planned down the road. We'll have to get 1976 scheduled. I'll be in touch for that. Other than that, please leave a comment, everybody. Check out Dave's channel, and we will see you on the next one.